Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is the oldest of my worm bins. This position on my shelf system is reserved for the oldest of my bins, and then you work your way in this swervy pattern to find the youngest. But the bin right here is the one we're going to work on today. It's been 8 days since we checked in on it. 8 days when we initiated what I call a horizontal migration of the worms out of the material that I consider to be more or less finished castings. I've got some other information about that system here that I'd like to share with you. Its age today is 169 days, and those 169 days break down into 132 days. The first bullet is the time that it took for that bin to complete the composting of 16 feedings, 132 days. And then I followed that with a secondary phase of what I like to do after the composting phase, which is foraging, which is really allowing the worms to focus on all the stuff that still remains from all those previous feedings of food bits and bedding chunks and all that other stuff they'd really like to see broken down thoroughly. And then it was 8 days ago. So we're now 8 days and counting into this third phase, which is the migration phase, trying to lure the worms out of the finished compost into a section of the bin that was set up 8 days ago with all kinds of fresh bedding and fresh food and moisture and everything like that. So I don't know where it stands right now after 8 days, but my plan is to check in on it and figure out what to do with it. Presumably we're going to probably want to add a little bit more food and some bedding to help the process continue and be successful. So I'm going to put on a glove and get that bin up on the bench and see how things are progressing. Different people use different methods for getting their worms separated from the castings. Some people have certain systems that are geared specifically for that, like those stackable systems where you feel that your batch of castings are ready and finished. You can just throw the next tray on top and the worms will climb up into the upper tray, leaving their finished castings behind. There's the process by which you can use bright lights to drive the worms down away from the surface, permitting you the opportunity to skim off the top surface of finished castings. Repeating that process over and over, driving the worms further and further down. Within a little while, you can end up with a nice batch of castings and a pile of worms at the bottom once you've removed the last of the material. This method here is the approach where you simply use bait, basically, to lure them over here, while at the same time giving this material on this side the opportunity to become drier, possibly a little bit less comfortable for the worms to remain in, further serving as a catalyst or a motivator for the worms to get moving, looking for a better, more comfortable spot. These sheets of cardboard you could see laid in here, they're not solid pieces of cardboard that would prevent any sort of worm traffic from moving through here. They're full of little tiny holes, specifically to permit the worms to pass through easily, to gain access to the moisture and the food. So I just need to periodically check my bins, especially bins like this one that used to live outside. I just like to pull these little critters out. I once in a while find a larva of some sort of an insect. My assumption on these are that they're moths, but I don't know. I usually squish them before they change to whatever it is that they are. I get no joy in doing that, but still I just don't like that, so that's what I do. There's other insects in here too. You might have noticed them while I was taking care of that little caterpillar or whatever it was. You might have noticed a couple little pill bugs. They're so awkward sometimes. I thought I saw one over here kind of fumbling on his back, trying to get on his feet, but he must have sensed me approaching and turned into a little sphere. It's like a little marble, rolls around so perfectly. I can see another one down here. These little guys, they're great on breaking down the tougher type materials. I'm going to put them right into our feeding area. I'm not sure if that's their preferred space to be. It seems like they were kind of hanging out up here in the castings themselves. But I definitely like the idea of keeping those little guys with my worm colony. What do we got here? All kinds of pretty good sized scraps of stuff that, is not yet broken down. All these things on the surface, definitely so dry that they're not going to really see any action, that's for sure. But at this point we're really not composting in this bin anymore. We're really just trying to get the worms to exit the material. So I think the only thing that gives this material over here a chance at possibly getting broken down is for us to maybe incorporate it down into the feeding area. Maybe we'll do that if we determine that replenishing the feeding area is the next best step, because I don't know yet. We need to see if there's still worms out here in this material. And all I need to really see is a few to let me know that there's still more time needed for this migration of the worms to complete. After 8 days, it's seems unlikely that we would still... Okay, yeah. I was wondering where the heck all the worms are, and it does seem like they've kind of gone way low. It did seem like as I scraped back more and more material, the material did seem to feel more damp as I went deeper and deeper, so they seem to be drawn to that damper stuff that's a little bit lower down. And once I get down into that lower section, I was able to find a good number of worms hanging out in that stuff. I mean, not a tremendous amount of worms, but still, obviously enough to say that this migration needs to continue. And I guess that whole drying process, too, will ultimately help all this material become less hospitable, too. But only if we air it out, kind of till it up. So it's kind of full, so I can't really go too crazy churning this stuff around, but I really would still like to at least kind of dislodge the majority of the material, sort of declumpify it, if that's a word. Declumpify? I don't know. Kind of just break up the larger, harder chunks. Not that any of this stuff is really hard or encrusted or like a, there's nothing about it that makes me concerned, basically. It is just a little bit more dense than it needs to be, I think. If we want it to start shedding some of its moisture, so I think tilling it up and loosening it up like this helps a little bit. Maybe it even sort of gets these worms to sort of snap out of kind of being cozy and comfortable and sticking where they are, and maybe get them moving a little bit. Perhaps they'll just wander aimlessly over into the feeding area and realize what they've been missing all this time and just stay over there. My assumption that everything here is still hunky-dory and comfortable and ideal, so I guess we'll get a chance to check that out in a moment. Let's just keep at this churning of the material. So, we've seen worms pretty much everywhere still. 8 days, it does seem like it would be a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of an optimistic sort of a prediction to think that this bin would migrate out in that little time. I think I was still even a little bit skeptical as to whether I wanted to start this migration, but I did get, pretty consistent feedback from the viewers that they felt like the material was pretty much done and it was time to start the migration. I tend to agree now that I'm kind of looking through this stuff. It's definitely pretty heavily broken down, despite having some residual scraps within it scattered all over the place. It's not a lot, really. I just once in a while keep bumping into like one of these little chunks of avocado seed that I cut up into little pieces. I recognize them immediately because they have these weird sharp edges and pointy corners, but they're also quite soft and they break apart really easily. And I like to try to help them break apart, so I crumble them when I can if I don't forget. This stuff here right on the edge, this almost seems like a bad practice to be doing this, especially since the worms are already pretty much practically where we want them. They're practically at the cardboard divider and almost on the other side. So for me to stir all this stuff up is a little counterproductive. I don't intend to deliberately distance any worms from the place where I want them to eventually wind up. But like I said earlier, I'm a little bit cramped for space in here, so it's even a miracle that I've been able to not spill a bunch of this all over the place on the floor and everything. But we've been avoiding this corner because that's where I piled all this dry stuff. I think I'm going to put it all into here. It'll give the stuff a nice opportunity to get some attention from the worms. It'll just go with the worms to their new home once we're ready to relocate this batch. So it's probably a better place for it to be out here. I'm expecting more or less finished castings, and all that stuff sitting out on the surface drying is not really that. So I think we did the right thing moving it over there. I just got another squatter here that I'd like to evict. Let me take care of that really quick. Well, I'll take care of it in a moment. I think we still just want to upturn this corner a little bit. Check out how the feeding area looks. And then I'll probably need to take a short pause just so I can run upstairs and go get a few additional little morsels that we can add to the feeding area just to make sure the migration is equipped as best as possible to ensure a smooth, steady migration of the worms as quick as possible over into the collection area. I don't remember, how big of a population we have in here, so just from the worms we've encountered so far, it's hard for me to guesstimate if we just encountered pretty much all the worms, so we should expect to see none in the migration area, or very few of what's thought to be the entire population, so maybe the majority of them are already over in the migration area. I have no really good way to predict of, what to expect in here because it could be anything. I haven't checked on it in 8 days. I can only hope that I built it up in such a way that it causes the type of reaction we're hoping for in the worms. So there is good moisture down low. I can feel it, and I'm already seeing some of the worms that are once again down low where the moisture tends to collect. It does seem like we've got ourselves a nice number of worms already in that first little handful that we examined. I believe that we should at the same time kind of make a little bit of extra space in here just so I can add a little bit more fresh bedding into this feeding area along with whatever fresh food we're going to include too. Let me just really quickly backfill that wall there now that we've given the feeding area a little bit more space to be in. Now I could sort of spread out what I find, but once again I'm going to have to stack it all up over there to make room on this far edge for the freshly added materials that we're going to put in. But here too it feels like I've got a good number of worms congregating down low where the moisture is. Definitely seeing a lot of damp bedding and a good number of worms. Leftover food, however, I don't really see, which is more or less to be expected. This population of worms, as you saw earlier, foraged for a month, so no food was provided. So that stuff they received 8 days ago was probably, gobbled up pretty quickly. I don't know how long it's been without leftovers. Actually, now I'm actually seeing a little chunk of leftover pumpkin. That's what would have been placed in here as the food. And I'm actually surprised to find such a large chunk. It's interesting. But if we find nothing more, then you'll have to admit that that's not much, because, I think we did put a good amount of pumpkin in here as part of the feeding. Finding some pretty good sized chunks of paper here, some coffee filters. Let's keep it on this side. I don't have worms squirming off these large chunks of paper and then just ending up back over in the compost when we'd already succeeded once to lure them over to this side of the bin. I just thought I had bumped earlier into another large chunk of cardboard. I thought it was another one of these paper tubes, cardboard tubes. And I keep forgetting about the cork, but here's the cork. And it's already in here to be relocated with the worms when the time comes to do that. I definitely like what I'm seeing. I think we're, getting the type of turnout we would have expected to get by now. And luckily the material in here all has a really nice, comfortable, damp feel to it. Everything's really loose and flaky and still nice and damp. The worms appear to be really enjoying it. Yeah, they're all over the place, but they've not left a great deal of leftover food over here, so I do need to head upstairs to grab some stuff for them. Let me do that now really quick. Shouldn't take me more than a couple minutes. I think I'm going to get them some more pumpkin. What I've got for them is pumpkin and coffee. Everything that I was able to put in my hands and carry from upstairs without putting it into some sort of a tray or something. Man, my hands are getting cold. I gotta put these down. So I think the first step is to open up some room in here. We'll put these large chunks of cardboard aside temporarily and begin shoving stuff inboard. I always like to set up these new feeding zones all the way on the far end. And I'd like to try to make it pretty large as well. Just so cool. All the way down there, I don't think the camera's going to spot it, but all the worms I see down really low in that damp lower section are really, really tiny baby worms. Lots of them. Lots and lots of baby worms. Not even nearly as big as this. Most of them a lot smaller. So let's grab some of my pre-made seasoned bedding. I'm sure a couple handfuls will do to get us started. I just want to have a little something other than the bottom of the tub to drop the food into. So I'm going to start here with a little bit of the coffee we bought in. We'll give about half right there, and maybe right there we could also include an additional hunk of cardboard, which will benefit from being right there on the firing line where the food and everything's going on. I think we could just start dropping in some of this yummy food as well. Let's make sure we're really generous with the bedding, because I like the idea of making this into a nice spacious spot for the worms to feel really comfortable in. Let's get this little guy out of here before I put this piece of frozen pumpkin right there where he was. I'm going to throw in a little bit more bedding right here. Once again, another handful. Seems to have done us pretty good here, getting us nice and high once again. I still need to put the rest of the coffee and 3 more chunks of pumpkin in here. So let's continue with that. I suppose this coffee doesn't necessarily need to end up all in the feeding area either. I could spread this out nicely. Now we've got yet another large chunk of paper here. These got pretty beaten up. Oh, some of them have worms all over them. I guess it makes sense to start bringing them right back over into the feeding area here. I like the idea of having some of these thicker materials floating around right out here on the top of the bin, helping to further suppress any moisture that might try to leak out through evaporation. And is that leaking if it gets out through evaporation? I think I just heard somebody say that the other day, and that's how it ended up in my ear, and me repeating it. I'm not sure if it's the right expression, but either way, you get the idea. You know, moisture is leaving the bin, whether it's leaking when it's evaporating or not. It's still exiting, and it's the same deal. Losing moisture, and you don't want that, not here at least. However, on this side of the bin where the finished castings are and some of the worms remain, it does seem like further drying of the material would be beneficial to motivate the remainder of the worms to get moving, to eventually stumble on the nice feeding area that we've got established for them over on this side, and allow us to have these castings. But we want to have all the worms in our population rounded up first, so this will continue, definitely. Come on, buddy, over there. So yeah, there's still a good number of worms remaining in this stuff, and it's no surprise because it is quite damp, and there's good amounts of lingering leftover foods in here. So the worms really don't have a great amount of reason to leave. That's part of the reason I do like to try to let this stuff dry off over time. Make it a little bit less hospitable, not making it dangerous or anything like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not creating a hazard or something that's actually injuring them in real time. It's just creating an environment that they too can sense that is not ideal for them, and it definitely leaves them with ample time to, you know, get themselves moving and start doing what they always do, which is seek out a better place to be, place with nice moisture, place with a good food supply, maybe in a place that's got some nice company. At this point, we're definitely creating a good environment over there where there's a good party going on already. So, I really should start thinking about where I'm going to be moving these little guys. I threw myself a little twist when I migrated my last batch of worms out of their old container. Made a little quick change of plans. So actually the bin that was intended for them originally might be a possibility for these little guys. But I don't know. I'm going to have to think that through and come up with a plan. But for now, I think we're done here today. So, before I get going, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your company. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.